Hi, welcome to Preps Plus Podcast, episode 45. I'm Josh Hart, sports editor here at the Daily News. I'm here with Preps reporter Jason Leskiw. So later on in the show, we'll have an interview with Castle Rock first-year coach Aaron Gehring. Jason sat down with him yesterday. What did you guys talk about?
The main theme was, what's it like to be a first-year coach? What have you learned? What surprised you? And there were several things that he touched on that I think will be pretty informative and interesting for our readers and viewers.
Yeah, we have a few first-year coaches in the area, and I believe all of them sent in their stats for our stat update. So that's a great thing.
That is.
So that's like you're number one coach in my book if you send in your stats. So I mean, even Nacel's Jeff Eaton, he said I had sent the email out on Monday, and he was like, I had these ready Sunday, ready for you. It's like perfect. That's what I like about a coach. But other than that, we'll talk about. I think head injuries is kind of the main topic here today. Obviously, Wahkiakum's sophomore Bo Carlson still in the hospital after injury on a fairly innocuous hit a couple weeks ago. Put somewhat of I don't know the right word for it, but certainly gave us a moment of pause as far as when it comes to football and our youth. Jason, you're pretty closely tied, have a lot of ties out in Wahkiakum. What's the feeling like out there right now? There's a story coming in Friday's paper, a little bit closer look at what happened and kind of how coaches and teams respond to that. But what's the feeling right now out there in Cathlima?
A lot of mixed emotions. It's somber, obviously. Community as small as that, everybody knows everybody there, and most of them are friends, and so you got this feeling of, okay, well, as far as the odds go, he's been 1 in a million is what doctors have told his parents, as far as his recovery, and but at the same time, I mean, so life-changing injury. I think it's probably going to, if it hasn't already, change the lives and the way people think about football in Cathlima and probably other areas. And Bo played baseball in Longview, played the Babe Ruth World Series, and the family's is rooted in the sports community for sure. So I think this affects a lot of people, and particularly the way that they might view football, especially, I would hope, those who think of injuries, especially in football, as hey, well, you could get hurt doing this, you could get in a car accident driving down the road, and those sorts of things. And a lot of people seem to forget or neglect the fact that there's contact for about every player on every single play in a football game.
Yeah, it's read both Jason's story that I think it's actually up online now, as well as Mallory's story from earlier in the week on the news side. Just the kind of heartbreaking nature when you step outside of the football field and just look at what that night was like for the family. And doctors are saying 1 in a million as far as the kid's chances to live were. I mean, or at least
it was 50-50 to live.
Right. I mean,
there's a lot of people who don't, and if certain responses hadn't been the way they were.
Right. I mean, there's a paramedic who knows brain trauma on the Adna sideline. They happen to be playing in Adna, closer to the Centralia Hospital. I mean, this could have taken a very, very different and much darker turn. He's certainly, doesn't seem like completely out of the woods yet, as far as kind of what his daily life will be like. I mean, this is, I think, as Steve Amrine said, these are high school kids. They're not making millions of dollars to play football. And that type of injury makes you think and say, even from a coverage standpoint, of like, what are we doing out here? Right? I mean, just kind of makes you, it was such an innocuous hit, and that's what's the scary part, right? Is like you never know it wasn't a lead with the head, smash the crown of the helmet.
There was hardly any contact.
Yeah, and that's kind of the scary part when it comes to this type of thing.
Well, and I hope. There's part of me that wishes a lot of people are able to view this, the play that he went down on, because it highlights, people think helmet-to-helmet hits or the collision is what can cause a concussion or another form of brain injury. You can be concussed 5 times on one play. Your head hits the ground, it bounces back on the recoil, then it hits the ground again. The change of direction, your brain is still moving around within your skull. Just from stopping, say you get in a car accident at 25 miles an hour. Well, your brain was traveling 25 miles an hour and it stops suddenly, it's going to hit your skull. The only question is kind of how it's going to hit your skull, on what axis, and so basically I've always felt, or at least in recent years, felt that there's no way to play football without brain injury. And it doesn't matter, anytime you're playing a game where you start and stop and have the kind of change in speed that say a bigger guy hitting a smaller guy, or even 2 big guys going head up. Head up isn't just one-on-one. There's no safe way to play football. And it's fair to say, you can get hurt in a car accident, you can get hurt playing soccer, baseball, you can take a line drive to the head, and that's true. But football is by far the most violent sport played in high school, and aside from mixed martial arts, maybe in boxing, it's certainly, as far as team sports, the most violent. I don't think there's any question. And the advancements in padding technology, helmets, I've heard kids say, "Hey, I can go 5 feet up in the air and land on my shoulder, and the pads absorb the impact. I don't hardly feel anything." And sure, there's adrenaline and things like that, but for the most part, my understanding is that's completely accurate. Even without adrenaline, the pads absorb so much and create kind of that sense of security that can be misleading. And so,
I think the UW defensive coordinator said this last year, that people are afraid of kind of the future of football, and he said if you're a football fan and you want to watch football in 100 years, you have to have these conversations now, or else it just won't exist, because as science comes along, we know more and more about exactly what happens on the football field. But as you're talking here, it kind of begs the question, do you think football should be around? We're both football fans.
Yeah.
You kind of said it. Do you think football should be around?
The fan in me says yes. The common sense, wannabe academic side of me says absolutely not. It has no place in a civilized society, and I think that same side would say the same with boxing and mixed martial arts. I think as humans I think have always had a craving, especially men, craving for violence, whether that be, battling in Roman days, and, to boxing and football now, rugby in other, I think rugby's, my understanding of people that have played rugby is it's less traumatic to the body for a few reasons, but mainly because you can only hit the ball carrier. There's no, hitting 5 guys on 5 guys or 4 guys on the offensive and D line, and so the answer is flag football. Yeah, maybe some form of seriously revised rules in football and tackle football. Yeah, but I don't see the game being the same 20 years from now. And we've already seen, I think, changes at the NFL level, at the college level. There's obviously new rules, and highlighted last week by Clay Matthews' hit, which was a clean tackle by the rule, I thought, and we've seen it in other regards recently at that level. But there's One thing that I wanted to read, there was an article a little bit ago posted on landof10.com, which is a Big Ten website, and it noted a study where 48 of 53 brains studied from former college football players showed CTE. So of 53, only 5 didn't have signs of chronic traumatic stick with CTE. That last word's never been good to me. And then also 3 or 14 kids who have only played high school football. So it's right around 20%, right? Obviously, it's a small sample. You're talking about 14 kids, 14 brains that were studied. But I think the fact that you saw that at all in kids that had played a maximum of 4 years tackle football says a lot. And there's been other studies that have shown certainly not to, there hasn't been enough to put something in the medical books that say football will, one season of football will hamper your ability to learn for the rest of your life, but there have been studies that have shown such results, if that makes sense. I don't know if that was kind of
do the benefits of football outweigh, especially because I think a big thing too is like, I think a big problem with some of the CTE findings and stuff was that the NFL hid it from players, right? The players weren't fully knowing. I think at this point, if you play football, you know the risks. Yeah. At least in part, you have a full
understanding. I think of the risks.
Yeah, you have at least a vague idea, right? That hey, my brain is at risk when I play football. Mm-hmm. So now that people are going into playing football with the understanding of what it can do the benefits outweigh the risks of it?
Football specifically, I don't think so. I was on the phone with a neurosurgeon yesterday up at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, and also a professor at UW. And his view was, playing sports is better than video games, which I completely agree with. And realistically, football is the only fall sports guys have around here. You can play, a youth basketball league and things like that.
Tennis?
There's tennis, and there's golf. But, the big three for sure. When you're talking the 3 sports that most people, I think most guys would think of when they think team sports is basketball, baseball, and football. And you're right, there are all alternatives, but when you look at the fact that, hey, this is all guys, and especially the polarizing aspect of football, I think that's almost what a lot of people gravitate towards is, running out of, whether it be a tunnel or just running through a banner. There's something, I think, romantic about that. And for a lot of people too, myself included, there's nothing as a kid I would rather have done than play a game of football, whether it was flag or tackle or whatever, and so there's that side, which is, I think, an important side. But as far as tackle goes, and especially the kind of football that most people think of when they think of the word football, there's no question that it's detrimental to one's health.
Would you let your kid play football?
Probably not. I mean, flag, yes. This is a conversation, as a father. Matter of fact, the day
would your fiance let you let your
see that's the weird thing, right? She's almost more open to it than I am. But I've also studied, been around it. I've seen, professional football players and coaches are not very eloquent, and part of that, I think, is because they've been knocked in the head so much. And also I've listened to quite a few doctors, Bennett Amalu, one of them, and he's probably the guy I might remember most as far as some of the things he had to say. When you his and the reason I mention that is because his take on letting your child play football that's effectively child abuse, because there's really, sure, there's team sports, and there's some takeaways that might benefit someone later in life, but they're not, it's not like football is the only thing that can teach those things, or you can gain that perspective from, you can gain that from basketball and baseball and other things. Flag football, absolutely. To be honest, there's a part of me that might have a tough time telling my son, especially if he was good and he really loved it, like I did, telling him, no, you can't play, tackle football, especially at the high school level. But it would absolutely be a conversation. And I would make sure he knew every single, negative that could come from that. Yeah. It's a deep, I feel like we've kind of been at a crossroads, and I think a lot of people have been in some form of denial, because I think for especially guys, football is such a major part of your life. You think about Thanksgiving, you think about the food, clearly, right? You think about family for a lot of people, but football is part of Thanksgiving for me, definitely, and I think for a lot of people.
I can get where you're saying where you can learn the life lessons that you can take from football and other things. You also mentioned kind of the romanticism of running out to a banner. I don't think there's anything that brings communities together quite like football. Go down to Schroeder Field when they're playing Morris or Kelso or Mountain View later this year. You got 4,000 people jointly coming together.
Sure.
With all of the differences they may have, just to cheer on some 17-year-old kids.
Right.
Or you see packed stadiums of 40,000 with hugely polarizing subjects like national anthem and kneeling and police brutality, all of these things, right? Coming together jointly, 60,000 people, all to support,
one cause or
a color, basically. I support the team in blue.
Right.
I don't see the same thing in other sports. I don't see Mark Morris Kelso basketball game is wild and crazy, and there's lots of people there. A Trailblazers basketball game brings in 30,000 or 25 or whatever. It doesn't have the same feeling of unity.
I agree with you.
And not division, but you as a Seahawks fan, I will do whatever. I will just hate a 49ers fan for 3 hours. Just because they're not,
Right.
they're on the other side of the field.
Right. And I agree. And there's a particular love that I think is unique to football, an emotion that's unique to football. My main point kind of is about the benefit to the player.
Yeah. Although I guess, to be fair, if we look at other countries, you see the same thing with soccer. And even on a grander stage, you have 100,000 people and you have people stabbing other fans. So
on the field,
so you
have coaches stabbing referees.
You don't have. I guess it's not necessarily unique to football, but I think for this country,
in America, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I can truly talk about it, but because I only played one season of football when I was 9 or something, and I was so scared I'd just pretend to be sick all game. That tells you kind of the person I am. But I've always loved football. I remember 8 years old watching the Seahawks, and I don't know. I think there would be something missing without football. Even if it was replaced by, I'm a huge soccer fan.
Yeah.
I think even if it's replaced by soccer, I think football does something. I can't quite describe it. You even hear kids say it too, is there is something different about football. There is something special and unique about it. And I think as long as somebody understands the risks, I'm a big fan of letting people do whatever the hell they want, right? And I think as long as they understand the risk going in. So I can see your opinion of saying like, okay, if an 11-year-old can't accurately make that decision,
right?
I do think a 16 or 17-year-old kid can though.
We disagree on that. I mean, yeah. For me, and I've talked with, I know several people that share kind of this, where, when you're 17, you'll jump off a 30-foot bridge into water, and, seeing an injury might not affect you much at all, a knee
but
injury
that's not
versus
necessarily,
25, 30.
that youthful, I guess, exuberance isn't always a bad thing. Like
I agree.
It's okay to jump off a bridge
right.
and break your leg jumping into 30 feet of water. It's okay. It sucks.
Yes.
But it's okay.
Well,
like you're gonna. I guess the difference is a football injury, you might not get through it, right?
Right. Well, and I think if you go back to kind of what you were saying a minute ago, and replace the word football with heroin or something,
Yeah, it's a little different. There's not very many benefits to heroin.
I agree. Well, yeah, no question about that. But I also wonder, aside from the kind of emotional rush I think that football brings, and in a lot of the same ways, I think psychologically it probably functions a little bit like a drug. I mean, I think football, I don't want to call it addictive, but we all know football junkies, right?
Yeah.
We all know people who watch film weekly. I have been one of them for sure. Before my son was born, we were talking about this yesterday. I mean, I could take a team often and watch a game and have at least a very good idea what concept they were going to run prior to them running it. I could tell you a touchdown was going to be scored prior, and I could tell you generally how it was going to happen before it was happening. And because I had watched so much football, and that stopped when my son was born and I had better things to do. But, you look at it that way, and I kind of wonder, what does it do? What is watching football, what does playing football do to your brain that makes it so enjoyable? And that's another, I guess we probably couldn't dive into that today, but,
yeah.
It's unique. I think pretty much everybody would agree with that in America. Watching and playing football is a unique and probably special thing. It feels special for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird because I'm kind of enveloped in the soccer world a little bit. I have a lot of friends and stuff in kind of those communities, and they will say, "Oh, football's barbaric," or whatever. But I don't know. There's a magic about it. I don't know. I don't mind there being conversation about it and being open to the possibility that it's terrible for you, but we have to realize a lot of these studies too are pretty young. There's going to be more science. I'm not a denier of football causes some sort of brain trauma.
Right.
But these studies are somewhat they're in the last 20 years. So you look at just how medical research develops. It will be interesting, and maybe it'll turn out to be worse than we originally thought, but it will be interesting to see how the research on it progresses. I wouldn't like to see football go, but
let me ask you, what's your take on do changes need to be made?
I'm not sure. I understand like the changes that are currently being made, but I think all this, I think a lot of the CTE is the repeatedness of it and not necessarily the extreme ones.
The more exposure is certainly.
I think it's like like woodpeckers have certain like things in their brain, to protect their brain from moving around, right?
Right.
And like I think it's more that repeated stuff. But that's just my personal opinion. I don't know the data on that. But like I see more people go down with concussions on very minor innocuous things than a huge blow. And they could have had a huge blow earlier in the week, and it's now just showing itself. But that's why I think it's more the repeated nature of it, and that's why I don't know if like this big like, oh, you got to not lead with your helmet and all like like some of those changes are like, yeah, we probably should have figured that out a while. I mean, you look at, I think Richard Sherman was talking about it on Twitter, was like the receivers in the mid 90s and early 2000s should get an extra like asterisk on their thing, like this guy should have had more yardages because you were an open target if you were in the middle of the field, like you were a sitting duck, and like they would just take your head off.
Yeah, Jerry Rice. I mean, it wouldn't be. I laughed when Randy Moss called himself the greatest, ironically playing for the 49ers. But when he said this, called himself the greatest receiver of all time in the modern era, Jerry Rice, I'm going to tell you, he would have been the first overall fantasy draft pick for his career in the modern NFL.
It's just, I like some of the changes of like, okay, yeah, you probably shouldn't like just be able to take that dude's head off.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some of these changes they make players think so much that like, I think like if you hesitate on a tackle or something, I think you're more at risk of a head injury. When you're thinking about like, okay, if I sack the quarterback, I have to in midair shift my body so I don't land on him, right? Yeah, I think
I got to twirl 3 times.
You're like, okay, you're coming into a hit, right? You're moving at 100 miles an hour, and you go, okay, I can't lead with my head. Gotta get the head up. Gotta get the shoulder in there, and now I have to twist my body to not land on him. You're starting to look at some.
Well, and that's the big thing, right? Is how do we? It's still, I think it's a debate that's going to go on for a long time. How do we play football safely?
Maybe remove the helmets. That was suggested not super long ago, but going back to like leather helmets, like look at rugby, right? Like, yes, you're right. They don't have that repeatedness, but I don't think you see a lot of just straight up head injuries because their heads are exposed. You're not going to go smash your head into somebody else's head.
Right. No, the level of brain trauma, and this has been studied, the level of brain trauma in rugby, and there's a larger sample because it's played globally, is significantly lower in rugby. And that's one big reason is you don't have this false sense of security. You don't have this armor like you're a Viking with chainmail, and you have to protect your body. And so
it would be interesting, like a MMA fighter, right? Like if you put them in like full armor, like if they would have more significant injuries. Because there's a certain thing, like you learn how to go with the blow, like you learn how to protect yourself in a lot of ways in boxing and MMA. Because like if you go like this and a guy's fist coming here, like you're done, like your lights are out. So like they learn how to protect themselves, and I think the football would be the same way of like players would learn how to keep certain body parts out of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean like. There's kind of a tacit agreement among a lot of players, like, there's clip blocking and rules and stuff too, but in NFL it does seem like there's a tacit agreement, like, hey, don't take out my knee, man.
Yeah.
Like, or I mean, there's some sort of retaliation if they do. It's like
not unlike baseball.
Right. There's kind of a tacit agreement, like, hey, this is a very sensitive part, and my career could be ruined if you rip out my ACL.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of those guys are friends. I mean, there's no team. There's very few teams where one team plays another, but the one player on each side went to school at Nebraska, Alabama, whatever. There's 200-something NFL players grew up in Florida.
I mean, I like the in the last 10 years what heads up tackling has done of like, okay, this is how you tackle, and I mean, you see it with the Seahawks, right? They kind of do that form of rugby tackle where you grab and you twist, right? Mm-hmm. And it's shown that's a more effective way to tackle in the first place. Like, is you get your arms wrapped around them and you twist them to the ground.
Right.
And learning in those type of things, I think, can make the game improve, at least reduce the risk of it, and then I think just making people aware of it. That would be my suggestion of it, and saying, hey, if you want to play football, here are the risks, and it's your choice. Like nobody says like we got to ban boxing, because everyone that goes into boxing agrees that they're going to get their head punched.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest first step that we got to make as a community too, is say, hey, yes, you can get into a car accident and you can take a big header playing soccer and hurt your head, or you can get hit by a pitch, whatever. But we got to stop. I think the big thing is we got to stop telling ourselves that these things are all the same, because they are not, and it's not even remotely close.
Yeah. Anyways, that's our discussion on head injuries. I'm sure it's a topic that'll come up frequently. Best wishes to Bo and
Yes.
the Carlson family.
Yeah.
This conversation isn't supposed to be about Bo or because of Bo, but it definitely opens up our eyes, I think, a little bit when you see something that severe where you go, this could have been a very, very terrible,
Right.
different outcome.
Yes.
And at that point, how does the discussion change?
Yeah.
Best wishes out to the Carlson family and kind of everything they're dealing with right now. The Kathleen community is very good at coming together and kind of being a family in that aspect. So we'll go on to brighter news. We got the interview with Castle Rock coach Aaron Gehring. He was a star for Castle Rock back in the day. I believe he played for Wazoo too.
That he did. Tight end.
Right on.
He's a big dude, man. He looks like a tight end.
And the Cougars it's perfectly timely because the Cougars are going to try to upset USC on I think Friday night. So
hey, let's not forget my nearly undefeated pigskin profits last week. The Giants
he had a tie though, so
everybody had a tie. It was the same for everybody.
Ties are the worst. This coming from a soccer fan. Anyway, we'll get that in that interview with Aaron Gehring.
All right, I'm here with Aaron Gehring, coach Castle Rock football, first year head coach. What's that been like for you?
It's been great. I mean, having a great staff, some younger guys I played with coming on board, mixing things up. I brought in Casey Connor, a guy from Oregon, and he has really added a lot with strength and conditioning, and just hardest part, just paperwork out of the get-go and kind of organizing and planning. Other than that, I mean, just back to X's and O's and having fun and playing football.
Okay. How much paperwork exactly is there for a coach? I know you have to have consent forms signed for various things, but
physicals, then you have all the extra emails from athletic director, front office, and then extra stuff with other coaches getting a hold of you. I mean, I was even in college never an email guy, and it was now it's like I got to check my computer every day, and parents contacting me and through email and just answering them.
Okay, right.
And then coming up with syllabus stuff and player conduct code. I went over with the kids where they had to sign, the parents signed, and just all the extra behind the scenes stuff. I mean, you missed out on as an assistant coach, which was nice.
Right. How much different in general is being a head coach versus an assistant?
Just mainly, I mean, assistant. Hey, this is what coming from the head coach. You need to do this, and now me being the head coach, delegating everything. Offensively, I'm not specific to one position. I just float, making sure the kids are doing it how we taught them, and just making sure that they're doing everything they need to be. And defensively, being the D coordinator, and I used to be the D coordinator under Boswell and the linebacker coach, and I bumped the linebacker duties off to Coach Gray, and so that way I can free float and make sure, especially being D coordinator, overseeing everything where D-line's hitting their gaps, ripping through correctly, coverages where they're getting to the hip, locking on, linebackers run first, and then getting their proper drops and making sure everything lines up correctly that way.
You guys had a good week last week. First win as a head coach.
Yeah.
How gratifying was that?
It's awesome, and always playing under the lights here at Castle Rock, and student section did an awesome job here on the sidelines. Great fan base coming out. I mean, friends, family, and all the support I've been getting from everybody in the community. My wife, she's been a trooper so far, especially with working here at the school district. I start work at 6 a.m. and with everything and quarterback club meeting last night, I didn't get home till 9:30, so it's a 15 and a half hour day of the grind. But yeah, I mean, going back to that Friday game, and I love tight, close games where you're in it, obviously, but nothing beats a blowout where you get everybody in on the sideline and everybody's having fun running around, and some of the kids that you haven't seen kind of open up, and then you can seeing them out there and having fun and flying around, where you can kind of see them develop here in a couple of years on spots where they could be and things like that.
Okay. You kind of mentioned something that prompts this question is, with the blowout, you know, you obviously played, and as a player, in your opinion, what's more of a confidence boost, that close battle where you pull ahead at the end, or maintain a close lead at the end, or a game like you had last week?
Well, it all depends time of the season. Right now, I mean, we had that close battle with Hoquiam all the way through 3 quarters. We had some guys cramp up, and I mean, again, Hoquiam, great physical team, and they kept going all 4 quarters, and it was 12-7, and then they got fast and, you know, put on an extra 20 points, I think, on us. And so that was our kind of close game where the kids knew they were in it, but then we had that Mark Morris where we were on the flip end.
Yeah.
So following that, I'd rather have, you know, that confidence booster of, we put on 36 in the first half, and some of the kids are like, hey, am I going to get in yet? No, starters all the way through first half, starters at least first series O&D to start the 3rd quarter, and then we'll start rotating guys in, where the ones need to feel that confidence and knowing they can drive and move the ball. And you saw that with Wyatt Partridge at the tailback, and I mean, he had 198 yards rushing on 14 carries, where he found a seam, he hit it, made guys miss. Brady Bach, after catch, made 4 or 5 guys miss, where they're running through contact and they're feeling that success, and just getting them where they're having fun and competing. And that's been the thing we've been just going over and over. Hey, compete throughout practice. The guy next to you, always try to beat the guy next to you. And they're starting to buy in. I mean, we have a lot of guys that are handful that are at that spot where they'll be every single play, and then some guys that are, well, I'm kind of tired, I'm going to pull off a little bit, but they're building and building. And we have a lot of other younger guys that are still wanting to compete and do the right things, which is very good to see.
Okay. It's funny when you mentioned Bach, you know, kind of breaking tackles. I remember as a kid, several decades ago, it feels like, you know, having that experience that first experience where you have to run through a guy. You kind of have, you know, in order to do what you need to do, you have to run, but you're not sure you can do it until you actually do it.
Right.
And you figure out, okay, well, maybe I should start doing this more.
And then on the flip end, just too, with even some of the guys on the defensive side, where, I mean, they might not even know they did it, and then you kind of, when they get off to the sideline after a big play, they're like, hey, this is what you did. I mean, you did it, and now you just got to repeat it, even in practice and things like that, where they kind of get that, like, whoa, what did I just do? And once they start learning that more and more, I mean, that's when obviously good things happen.
Okay. Has anything surprised you so far? I know we're still kind of early in the season, but so far, is there anything that's been like, oh, wow?
Well, we knew right away coming in we had to change the culture of just, not just winning, obviously that'll come, just being able to compete and going that way. And that, throughout the start of the season, I mean, we made it all the way to practice 14 before. It was kind of one of those practices where you just feel it, where they're kind of sluggish.
Right.
But I mean, that surprised me. I was thinking we were going to have, you know, practice early on where we'd have that dip. And I mean, they kept going and going and going and going. And that was very surprising. And they're still building. And I mean, after every game, like I said, they know they're right there, especially with the Hoquiam and Mark Morris game, and just keeping their heads up. And mean, like I said, they're doing a great job, and with that staff around them and always being positive and encouraging for all the guys, and just on that end. And there's a couple players that we knew at some point would be helping us either down the road or more of a role player that now they're starters week 3.
Right.
And that was surprising, mainly with a couple of the younger guys.
Okay. I've heard from several coaches that, like, as an assistant, you're almost building, almost like a JV player building towards varsity.
Mm-hmm.
You're building certain skills and learning from, the guys around you, and that without that experience as an assistant, being a head coach would almost be, it wouldn't be successful.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you felt?
Yeah, I mean, so this first head job this year. So I did 7 years as an assistant, 4 under Ben Seaver and 3 with Boswell. And I mean, just like with any job, there's always going to be pros and cons on each coach. And I'm sure if you ask the assistants, they'll tell you right away, hey, these are his strengths, this is what things he needs to work on. So, some of the younger guys ever decided they wanted to be a head coach down the road or high school, middle school level, but there's always things you can learn and take away from the coach you're under, even learning a lot of stuff from the assistants that I've worked with over the years.
Okay. Has there been anyone like lesson that you learned from Serbier or Boswell that, that's really making an impact so far for you?
Just, being up front with the guys right away and telling them how it's going to be, because, you kind of miss out on a couple areas and they start forming bad habits, and that's hard to go back on and correct. And right out of the gate, you're telling them, okay, this is what we do. Like, one thing, just little things, toe behind the line, touching the line with your hand, running on the field with your chin strap buckled up, ready to go,
Right.
Hustling off the field. The only time we walk is right when we meet up on me at the end of practice, because practice is done. Then you can walk off the field. So just little things like that where they know, like, there's an expectation. And that's definitely one that I've taken away from them.
Okay. What's been the hardest part of the job so far?
Just overall, just the time.
Okay. Yeah.
9-month-old daughter, and she's amazing. Like I said, going back earlier when I talked about my wife, I couldn't do it without her, and just being away from them is just the hardest part. And being a competitor and wanting to always have the kids be at their best every single play. And I know being an athlete from playing here and at Washington State, where you'll have those days and plays where you're like, I'm just not feeling it, where you kind of got to keep pushing through it, and just with that and wanting the kids to succeed and be their best all the time, and it'll come.
Okay. What's been the most, if not quite fun, but has there been a moment, whether it's in practice or a game, where you see something and you're instantly happy?
Yeah, just with high school, I was a high school quarterback here, went to Washington State tight end, so I was always the offensive side of the ball.
Okay.
And so when I came back, bounced around, coached all the positions, and then Boswell making me the D coordinator and starting to call the plays. And even before I was a D coordinator at D line, and those guys making big plays where, hey, that's what we worked on practice, and they come into the game and they do exactly how you showed them, and it's a big play. Brady Bach come flying off the edge, send him on a blitz.
Okay.
Quarterback's there, we're striking right over the top. Sack, fumble, we get on it. Right away, that's like watching the play into it, and then all of a sudden, feel like I'm jumping, 4 feet off the ground, excited, going to shake the guy's hands, they run off the field. Just big plays and the guys just playing the game. That's always fun.
When you're talking about the strip sacks, obviously, guys at the end, when you watch TV and you see college and players do it looks natural. But how tough is it to coach that to someone that is 15 years old or so?
Well, right away, especially with the D line, like, they go through, all they see is the quarterback, and they think, hey, I need to get a sack and tackle the quarterback. And there's whole nother aspect of still wrapping up one hand, coming down hard over the top with the other. That takes a lot of practice and repetition to get them to, and then once they finally click, we're, oh, that's what I need to do. And Brady, being a fourth-year senior, and he's a guy that will do anything you ask on the defensive side of the ball, and he's a good guy to have out there. And like I said, I'm being a senior, and he's worked on that over the years, and just football IQ, his high football IQ, so he knows when he sees that ball, trying to get it out. And then we have every guy now, when they're swarming to the football, the guys wrapped up, people are going for the ball. And in the past and over the years, a lot of the time they just wrap up and go until they got into the ground. And so it's just repetition and building on that and getting them like, hey, you guys wrapped up, now it's time to get the ball out. Or I have an opportunity to pop the ball out on the quarterback, strip sack. And so just getting those guys to think about it and raising their football IQ.
Okay. And lastly, you know, I guess, is there a goal for you to, as far as, you know, gaining knowledge by the end of the season? Do you have any one thing or a group of things that you'd like to, I suppose, have improved on maybe by the end of the season?
Just with, as a team, like I said, competing all the way through all 4 quarters. I mean, from how we look at it as a coaching staff and with the guys being into it, we think the Trico League is wide open. Obviously, I'd love to win the Trico first year out as a head coach, but I mean, again, we're building and getting these guys better, and just with all these guys taken away and getting them to understand that football is just a game. I mean, I love it. I think it's the greatest game in the world, but there's so much more that they can take out of it once they finally graduate. And I mean, if we taught them those kind of things, communication, teamwork, adversity, all of those different positive words and things that they can build on, where, you know, they're having a hard time in life, or, you know, they have whatever it is, where they're like, oh, well, I've kind of been through that, but I mean, that on the sports side of it, where, you know, as a coach, we did our job to make them a better person overall down the future.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Thanks for joining me, Aaron Gehring. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, man.